Do you think that everyone has the equal ability to be encapsulated, enmeshed, as you say, in that sort of a relationship? Or does it take a particular type of person? When you're talking now, addressing you, do you think that if there's a particular type of person, is it more likely to be a woman than a man who gets involved in that sort of a relationship and who can't see the way out? But do some people get drawn to that sort of psychopathic personality type more than others, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things I set out to learn in the book, because I was like, why do I, this is beyond me wanting a bad boy. This is far beyond. I mean, it's like I had a sign on my head, you know, like Psycho Zone. And I was like, how do I turn this off? So what I began to do was I began to delve into the people that become victims or whatever. And it can happen to anyone, yes. And yes, it is a gendered crime. I'm not saying that women cannot display psychopathic tendencies. You know, I'm not going to get into the hashtag not all men, but it is, if you look at the figures, it is a gendered crime. So it is more women who are who fall victim to psychopaths or narcissists or controls, let's put it. But really the first kind of idea there is that people will think, well, victims or survivors of these personality types, you know, they must be weak, they must be vulnerable. And yeah, you know, you said you just bounce from one to the other, so you must have each time been weaker and weaker. You know, there's probably an element of that is true. If you don't take time between relationships, especially abusive relationships, then you are going to, you know, not be whole, let's just say. But really, the people that are, you know, these kind of controls are attracted to are actually strong, you know, intelligent, you know, brilliant people that have the traits that they wish they had. And so they will trap these people who are maybe charismatic, who, you know, have got a rapport with as many people as possible, because if they gain those skills, if they gain those tools, then they can themselves manipulate more people. So it's a very victim blaming mentality to think that it's only weak and vulnerable women who fall victim to these people. Actually, the opposite is true.
Yeah, and you go definitely to this, that comes across, of course, in the book. But so you've sort of addressed why you might have been drawn to that, or why people might be drawn to that kind of a person. One thing I meant to ask you is the difference between a psychopath and a narcissist, because there are lots of similarities, and people might think, oh, well, actually, I'm in a relationship with someone who shows narcissistic tendencies. And you just quite rightly say, in this world with social media and stuff, more and more people display those tendencies. But you define and describe quite clearly the difference between the two, and they are not the same thing.
No, they're not the same thing. And I think, yeah, I mean, I deliberately in the book, actually, funnily enough, this was a whole chapter. I had a whole chapter on the difference between narcissists and psychopaths. And I was working with Carol and the brilliant team at Bluebird. And I remember having a conversation about this and Anna, and saying, God, I just feel like I'm getting into the psychology so heavily, you know, of all of this and the differences. And I feel like, you know, why does that matter? Yes, there are differences, huge differences. You know, the psychopath, the true psychopath, you know, cannot feel, or can only feel marginal amounts of empathy, whereas a narcissist can, but it's more manipulative. There are different types of narcissists. There's the covert and the overt. In fact, there's a belief that there's 8 different subcategories of narcissists, but, you know, at the moment in the book I detail 2. So that there are loads. I mean, for example, the psychopath is believed not to have a conscience, whereas the narcissist does have a conscience, but again is, you know, tends to use a kind of Machiavelli, lying, deceitful, whatever. And so I do go into that, but funnily enough, I shortened it all. I think it's like 3 pages or something in the whole book, because I felt like it was back to what I was saying there. I could imagine people reading this and going, oh yeah, you see, my guy or my partner has not got all of these tendencies. They don't tick all of the traits of Dr. Robert Hare's checklist, the psychopathy checklist. So I must be okay. You know, yes, I feel intimidated and fearful every single day of my life, but they don't tick all of these. Like, they do follow the rules, and etc., etc. And I didn't want that to happen. So I lay out, yeah, the differences, but really it's quick.
But what the important thing is, yes, people might then say, oh, well, they don't display that. But when you go on to describe in detail, and we won't, I don't think, be able to get through them all, the elements and the things that people do to quietly, subtly, or overtly just destroy and control their partner's self-belief, and just to control them, are really quite frightening. And they are subtle sometimes. And you talk about a lot of different things people do: negging, gaslighting. Perhaps you could, as I say, people will read more in detail these sorts of things, but I'm sure many people would quietly and perhaps uncomfortably relate to many of the things you describe.
Yeah, sure. I mean, funnily enough, I talked about the media. I don't quite know what I mean by that, but the media portrayal of domestic abuse. And what often happens on television is that domestic abuse is portrayed as a woman getting punched in the face. People go, oh, that's domestic abuse. And I'm not going to cite programs, but, they're quite easy to find. More so now, people are becoming a little bit more aware of coercive control, emotional abuse. But, by its nature, as you said, the word is subtle. They are insidious. So, there's a quote that's been pulled out by some reviewers already, which is that what you put up with at the beginning is not what you will put up with at the end. And so through things like love bombing, which is where at the beginning of the relationship, they will flatter you off your feet. They will buy you massive expensive gifts and tell you how wonderful you are. And, we should get married. How about we have kids? I imagine what our kids would look like. And, me saying this now is also almost laughable. You'd be like, Jesus, I would run. But actually, the truth is that you wouldn't, because if you were looking for that, whatever it is that you're looking for, if you're looking for someone to listen to you, if you're looking for someone to gossip over soap storylines, they can be that person. And so they start wheedling their way into your life. And after that stage, so they're in the kind of love bombing, the way I describe it in the book is that there's a sort of 3 phases to this relationship, this type of relationship. You've got distinguish, where they make you feel very distinguished. They do things like love bombing. It's a honeymoon phase. And then they move on to the devalue stage. And the devalue stage comes in very many different guises, and it's incredibly subtle. So it could start, as you say, with negging, which are, basically criticisms masked in compliments. So they could be things like, it's so great you got that journalism job, but it's funny that they didn't choose someone with an actual journalism degree. Or one of the things that was said to me was I was doing some time I was presenting on TalkSport, and it's true, I knew jack shit about TalkSport, about sport. I never said I did. I don't actually know how that came about, but he was really, really angry about it, and he would say, it's really funny that they keep you on that show because you know nothing about sport. And I was getting, really feeling worse and worse about it. Or it would be things like, oh, you had less makeup on yesterday. I thought you looked a lot better than you do today. Stuff like that. And these are so subtle that you kind of, and then obviously if you say, that's not very nice, or why would you say that? They can just say the classic line which is, oh, I was just joking. It's just a joke. God, you take it so seriously. And from there, then you start going, oh, actually in the first phase, not that you think of it as phases, but they have been really kind to me and lovely and listened to me and given me things and, been the person that I want. And they did start, they did say that they saw our future and whatever. So I'm going to give them a break, and then we're in this devalue phase. And then it will come, things like isolation is a key one. And that is done very, very carefully. And it will be things like, and I say this, all of this from direct experience, but I remember this particularly, which are things like, I don't think your family like me and it makes me feel uncomfortable. And so, of course, you, the victim, will think, oh, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. I want to make you feel good. Of course I do. You made me feel good there at the beginning. Yeah, it's your mom or it's your dad or it's somebody in particular. I feel like, I'm trying to talk to you and they're trying to ring you and you should listen to me. And so slowly you start going, yeah, okay, all right, fine. Oh, this friend of yours, they're quite, they're always like meddling around in your life or whatever. Yeah, okay, yeah, you're right. Until slowly you are in population 2, you and the psychopath or the control. And that is when you're, extremely vulnerable. It's just you and them. And then comes the devalue stage. So the devalue stage can happen weeks, months, years, decades down the line. And the way I describe it in the book is like a cat playing with the mouse. So eventually there will come a point when that cat doesn't want to play with that mouse anymore, because the mouse is half dead and it's boring. It's not interesting anymore. The thrill of the chase is gone. It's been caught. And unfortunately, that is what happens. You know, they go, I've had enough. I'll have someone else. And so those three phases, you know, have loads of different tools and techniques that they use against you, but those are the kind of umbrella terms.
Yeah. And the isolation is so important, isn't it? Because people might wonder, and you wonder, okay, well, you're clearly in a difficult relationship. This person you're in a relationship with is not kind, is not treating you well. That's going to be blatantly obvious to friends and family. So you might wonder, well, why aren't they stepping in and convincing you? So that comes because you're purposefully isolated by the perpetrator, but also you get a sense of probably pushing them away, a need to push them away.
Yeah, and there's another thing at play here, which is toxic shame. You know, the victim feels shameful, you know, that, oh God, I'm letting this happen. You know, maybe I'll just put my head in the sand and pretend it's not. And, you know, I don't want to go and spend time with friends and family right now because I am feeling tired and weak and intimidated. So I'll just stay in my own little bubble here. So yeah, you've got that at play too, but it is important because when you are isolated, you're at, you know, obviously you're most vulnerable. And, you know, I think a key thing to look for is, as a victim or a survivor, is honesty. And if you are feeling the need to lie to people about seeing them, messaging them, dating them, all of the above, then just pay some attention to that, because, you know, there's a reason that you're trying to cover it up. You know, most people in your life, most people want the best for you, friends and family, they love you and they care for you. And so, you know, you're made to believe by the perpetrator that they are meddling and, you know, they're trying to control you, ironically, but actually, you know, all they want is for you to be safe. And yeah, there's a big section in the book on this.
It's so much to talk about, and now I'm wishing we had hours more. I think that we've touched on this, but the really most important or very important thing, we've had some perhaps breakthroughs in the last years. I'm thinking of Rosie Duffield, I think, who spoke up in Parliament. But the really tricky thing, and you talk about it in the book, is that there isn't concrete evidence or examples. The language is so murky around these sorts of kind of verbal abuse, I suppose. I just wonder, you know, your thoughts, having kind of been there, come out of it as an ambassador for Women's Aid, what can be done to sort of make it easier for women to recognize that it doesn't need to be a kind of abusive physically relationship to be just as worthy of kind of proper support and need and help?
I mean, first of all, you know, let's move from the onus on the woman to the courts and to, you know, those in a position of power. I mean, I'm not able to cite specific cases, but I'm sure everybody in the last couple of weeks would have seen the news and seen the disgustingly low sentences that were given, you know, in cases of coercive control. And even just looking at some of the headlines, I think one of them was, she has a tendency to date bad boyfriends. You know, that's the spin that we're looking at things from, and it's insane. I mean, Farah, the CEO of Women's Aid, she stepped up when all of these things were happening, and she very rightly said that education needs to happen, not for the women and awareness and all of that, and that's what this book is about, but really also for the judges, the lawyers, you know, the people in court who are making those decisions, and police, you know, because yes, there are some conversations happening now, and yes, people are becoming aware of gaslighting, of the insidious nature of emotional abuse, but there's not enough. It's not enough done. And like you said, and, you know, it is extremely difficult to get evidence of this. And, you know, most of the time, that's not what victims want. They don't want to have, you know, the person prosecuted. They just want peace, you know, and I say that from firsthand experience. But there are some things that you can do. You can gather evidence, you know, if there's financial control at play, you know, you can gather receipts, look at bank statements, things like that. In the book, there's a whole list of evidence that you could use. But I remember deleting streams and streams of abusive messages because I couldn't face looking at them anymore. And so it becomes difficult then, doesn't it? Because you go, well, how is it true? You know, I don't believe you that it's true because you can't see anything. And you know, by its nature, these relationships are designed to keep you quiet. Well, I would say that one of the things that, if we're going back to survivors or victims, you know, that you can look for is patterns. Like I said at the beginning, this is really crucial, that there's a cycle of abuse, you know. So when you start, like I said, you've got this kind of honeymoon phase and you've got all these lovely chemicals, hormones going through your body. You've got dopamine, you feel great, you're on cloud 9. And then what starts to happen is you're going then into the next phase. And the next phase is the tension phase. And that's when you start getting things like cortisol. And in the book, I describe it as walking on barefoot on red hot coals. You know, it's not enough to say walking on eggshells. It's this, I'm walking into the room, my shoulders already up, my breath is up here, you know, I'm unbelievably tense. That's when you start getting intestinal gut issues. You know, I talk about that in the book as well. And then inevitably the next part of this cycle is the big explosion, the fight, the screaming, the shouting, but it's all done inside probably. You know, most likely it's done inside because otherwise people would see, you know, that's proof. It's all done behind closed doors, you know, not 9 times out of 10. And like I say, it does not need to be physical. Intimidation. So you've got all of these hormones, you know, these chemicals going on. And then, you know, finally, when I used to think of it like, you know, Mount Vesuvius, it sort of erupts and you're just in this cloud of infernal ash sort of shivering. And finally, they've released what they need to release. And then the next phase is the reconciliation. And there will probably be no word sorry, but it will be use of gaslighting. So they may say things like, you know, God, you're hysterical. It doesn't need to be like this all the time. Or, you know, we shouldn't talk when you're on your period because it's just, we always argue, you know, or, you know, it's histrionic, like you're crying all the time. It's too much for me. Just calm down. And by this stage, you've gone through all of these 3 cycles. So you're exhausted. So of course, what do you want most? You want a hug. And that's the next stage. Again, we're at the top. We're back on the honeymoon. And so when they give you that love, whatever form, I say love in inverted commas, but that hug or whatever form it comes in, you want it. And that's the sadness of all of this, is that you just want to be loved. And so that is a pattern, and that will repeat. You know, that is the real difference between dating just a dickhead and dating a control, is patterns. And so I would say to the people who are victim of this, who are wondering, just look at your patterns. Do you keep dating the same person? But look at the patterns within the relationship.